a question, like a big question they want to bring to mind?
Yeah, I think I have something. So I think like the question, to paraphrase Mr. Cadden, is like whether or not the McCullough versus Maryland case was a proper application, necessary and proper clause. So I think first we need to figure out what we think the necessary and proper clause means, and then once we have that definition, we can see if that definition is used properly in the case.
Do you think we need a testable definition of necessary and proper?
Well, yeah, just like what do we think it means? I guess testable, yeah. If you want to uphold it to that, then yeah.
Are you asking that, or are you asking if we should close read the actual clause itself?
Same
Well,
with
it's-
second.
That's what you're.
Yeah,
Because
that
there's
could
a
be.
difference between looking at the just necessary, what necessary and proper actually definition means versus what the actual clause says. That's the difference.
Either way, anyone like it doesn't. Not just me. Like however we think we want to make it. I'm not dictating how we interpret it.
I think Marshall actually has a good read on necessary and proper, being that, and I think, I certainly see how one could have a strict read in saying necessary and proper could be a very, like, to use the post office example, to establish post offices and post roads, sure you can make roads, but you can't, and it's necessary to buy pavement, but it's not necessarily necessary to keep up those roads. I made it up. Like you could have a very, very strict read, but I think it makes sense to use the logical, the logic that Marshall uses, which is that something is if you pretty much to make it work as well as it can, you need X, Y, and Z, then that is proper to do, and it's actually necessary.
I agree with Jake. At first, I'm tempted to give a definition like, in order for something to be necessary, it needs to be impossible to imagine the thing without that other thing. So it would need to be impossible to imagine establishing post roads without buying, what's the word? Tar. Without buying tar. And so if you can, then it's not necessary. But I think that Jake is right. It's kind of ridiculous. Like if you can imagine having the post roads be dirt roads, then you would end up with Congress doesn't have the power to buy tar. And so I think that we should not have such a strict definition of necessary, and Jake's is better.
Well, oh, sorry, you go.
I think that the definition of necessary is pretty clear. Like, if you can't do it without it, then it's necessary. I think the real question is, what does the proper part mean? Like, what does it mean for something to have to be necessary and proper? Can something be necessary but not proper?
I think that's the exact example, like the dirt roads versus the paved roads, is that yes, you don't need to pave it, but that's going to be the most efficient and most proper way.
Yeah, but you don't need a third party to pave the roads. Like that's not a necessity.
Exactly.
But could you make the argument that that is the proper way to do it, because then you're getting professional road builders, and they're the ones who are gonna do the best job of designing a road. So arguably, yeah, they can do that.
You could also argue that it is necessary because if you have all these congressmen and senate people paving the roads, how the hell are they supposed to do their job making laws?
Well, there's a difference between like the actual congressman doing it, because like that's very unrealistic. But you can have government paid employees do it.
Yeah, like you can start
Is this
even
based on
a
government
government-owned.
paid? It's government
The
control
private,
overall.
that's what privately owned means. I'm pretty sure that's what it means.
So if we played that out, let's say, so there is currently no road designing department of government. let's say you wanted to establish roads without chartering a private company, how would you do that?
You're saying because you need to buy tar and you need to maybe be able to, it's a dangerous place, you need to be able to defend the people who are the workers, you need to hire workers, is that what you're saying?
I'm not necessarily, I just wanna know what could be an option other than chartering a company.
I think
Okay,
that's-
so
You have a government owned, the government owns like,
Public Works.
exactly.
And you said that there's no part of government that's like for road building, but isn't
Like
there like
the-
the transportation,
MBTA.
That's
MBTA, whatever, federal,
That's
what, I don't know what it's called, I mean,
local
federal
and
highway.
state like.
So then who's gonna do the physical road paving if it's not a chartered company?
It's someone
Government,
hired-
they hire government officials.
So they have to hire
government people.
individuals rather than companies?
Or they could own a company. But
They
like,
own a-
I feel like this is kind of off topic compared to the bigger question that like that the seminar is about. If like, can we, like, sorry, I don't mean to like,
I'm really,
That's a good, but I just want to pause and say, that is exactly a move that you should make in a seminar, if you, just keep things on track, absolutely.
I'm really interested in the proper thing, because I have like empathy in my head. I don't think that in any of our discussions we've ever tried to define the word proper. And I was wondering if somebody had an idea, and not like proper in terms of defining it in terms of necessarily proper as its own word, because they're different words.
I have an idea of how Marshall defines it, which is about best way. And then I expand the definition to look at the whole, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So I think about all the stuff like 3 through 6 is all about money, but it's things like to borrow money, to regulate commerce, it's powers, but it doesn't say how to actually do them. And so Marshall's saying the proper way, the best way to borrow money to regulate commerce is a bank.
If that's true, then Marshall's logic, I think, is very circular because the necessary and proper clause gives Congress the power to like do what's proper, and he's saying it's proper because they decided it was the best way, and it's the best way because they get to do it the best way. Like,
Well, you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it's not Marshall's job to decide what's proper. The point is that Congress has the right to do what they think is necessary to establish their X, Y, and Z, and what they think is the quote-unquote proper way to do it. And I think to assume that to say that Congress can raise the support of Navy, and if they want to raise, and if they want, that was a bad example. If Congress wants to coin money and they want to make a building or buy a building so they can, where they'll coin money, to say that they have to buy it in the smallest little dinky place because it's a minimalist. Well, clearly Congress can do their best to make their money good money. Like why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't necessary and proper mean that Congress can make the government do a good job?
well, also, it's not that like it has to be a necessity for them to do it, it's whether Congress deems it to be proper and a necessity. It's like,
Well, it's not
Right.
just
yeah.
it's not really it's not our perspective, it's what Congress thinks.
Congress, Congress doesn't necessarily get the end-all say-all of what's necessary and proper. The Supreme Court does by trying to find if it's constitutional. So Congress could say, we think that the best way to coin money is to make a different mold for every single coin that we mint. Then Congress can't just do that based on necessary and proper. The Supreme Court can say, no, that's not necessary and proper, and so it's not covered under that clause. We were saying a lot of Congress does whatever it wants, I just wanted to make that distinction.
Well,
Yeah.
this doesn't, sorry.
I think bringing that back to the actual case at hand, McClellan versus Maryland, I think Marshall's argument in here is that is kind of like the opposite of that. And I agree with you. I think that it should be the Supreme Court's job to define the words, because I think that it's their job to interpret the Constitution and therefore define all these words like this or define malice. And I think that my issue with Marshall's argument is that he's basically saying, well, we should just trust the Congress to like trust them and say that and understand that they are just going to do the best, that they're obviously going to do the right thing and they're going to interpret it necessary and proper, and since they have that right to do that, we should just trust what they're going to do. And I feel like that kind of takes away the whole job of the Supreme Court being a check or a balance to what the Congress
Well,
does.
no,
So can I ask you for evidence of that in the Marshall ruling?
And I also just want to say that, like, I don't, did you say that it's Congress's job to clarify it, or the Constitution?
No, I think it's the Supreme, wait,
Congress as in Supreme Court.
I think it's the Supreme Court's job to try and define the Constitution's words. Yes.
Okay,
That
so
was
just
clarifying.
so just to like almost reword it, it's almost like they like because they're reviewing what the Congress can and can't do. A lot of times it's like Section 1, Section 9. And like so you're almost saying that like it's their job to interpret necessary and proper, but that the Marshall ruling is in essence giving them an excuse, like we're not going to prosecute the Congress on whether or not, even if we think that it might not be necessary or proper.
Not exactly. I think that he's kind of saying because this clause is, I feel like he's kind of skirting around the main issue he should be addressing, which is defining necessary and proper. And I think he's doing that by saying necessary and proper is in the I don't have my exact right now, I need to look closer. My exact line, I mean. But what I remember is reading and understanding that it seemed to me that he was saying necessary and proper is a thing that Congress has the right to do. And therefore, because he spends like one paragraph describing how like you need to move things from like one side of the country, you need to move money from one side of the country to the other side of the country in order to raise an army, like or do whatever you need to do with your funds. And I feel like that's the only part in which he addresses the actual necessary and properness of the bank, and the rest is just kind of saying, well, we can't, necessary and proper is a thing that we need to have because we can't, where is it?
I think
Because they have to have ample means for their execution.
I think a line that backs up what you're saying is Brian, if you look on page 3 of the packet with his ruling, the paragraph right below the bolded part, it says, the subject of this case is the execution of those great powers on which the welfare of a nation essentially depends. It must be the intention of those who gave these powers to ensure, so far as human prudence could ensure their beneficial execution, and then this could not be done by confining the choice of means to such narrow limits as to not leave it in the power of Congress to adopt any which might be appropriate. I don't know if that's talking about if that like is really what you're trying to say.
No, I think it seems here that he's defining necessary and proper as appropriate.
Well, he's just,
Well,
and he's
or
also using
whatever
examples, like he's
I-
using examples of how it should be used, as in
I
the
don't
post
I don't see in this paragraph what you're seeing, which, as I understand it, is the idea that Congress gets to decide and is not to be questioned on what is necessary and proper.
I'm not saying that he's saying that Congress should be questioned. I feel like, but I was saying that I feel like the majority of this, like, I felt as though the majority of this ruling wasn't exactly spent on defining necessary and proper. Instead, like actually defining it instead of saying it's something that is necessary and proper. Like, for example, to establish post offices and post grids. I'm trying to still find the exact line where I saw that, but
Well,
Yeah.
I think, like, I think not only is it hard to define necessary and proper, but it's problematic, because if you have SCOTUS saying, I don't like your method of creating a bank, I think it's actually a bad method, it's not necessary, it's not proper, because that makes SCOTUS start acting as a legislative power instead of judicial power. It's a hard definition to make, but it also, when you start defining it very specifically, you run the risk of SCOTUS overreaching its bounds.
To add to that point, like if you take this example, the bank is in Maryland, and the SCOTUS could say that, yeah, sure, it might be proper and necessary to have a bank, but because it's in Maryland, you're not allowed to take up state property or private property, and you have to find somewhere else to put it. Like, it could be, it's not like proving necessity is such a tough thing, because I'm looking at the definition now, and it says like, required to be done, like essential. Like, it's very difficult to prove that there's only one way to do things. Usually in life, there's multiple ways to do things. So I feel like, although you could hold necessary to very strict scrutiny, doing so would be an incredibly impractical thing because it would send the country in a bad direction. Like when we're talking about politically versus legally sound, like you're seriously jeopardizing any power Congress has at all because you can always prove that there's an alternate way to do things.
I think that's where the question of whether something's proper comes in, because something might not be necessary by that strict definition, but it could be like it's necessary to do it in some way, so if there are multiple ways, you have to do it in a way that's also proper.
But just to play devil's advocate here, it has to be necessary and proper, not necessary or proper.
Yes,
So-
but like the thing needs to be done. Like I agree with Sophie, it needs to be done, and which is the necessary, and the proper is how they choose to have that thing done.
Which is whether
Yeah.
it's appropriate or not.
Yeah.
Okay. I just think proper has to be very necessary. It has to be very broadly defined. Because if you want to say proper meaning you think that the Congress is trying to get away with something that completely violates the Constitution, has nothing to do with these things, but it's twisting words in a way that goes against the other how many section not verses, but clause of Section 8, then fine, it's not proper. But if there's any chance that this could be towards the ends of one of these powers, it should be allowed.
Does anybody disagree with the fact that necessary and proper should be defined broadly, like in our seminars? Because I think we're all in like agreement.
I think it should be.
I think it should be, but I almost do kind of see the other side of it. That like, that if you keep it so broad, like, I don't know if I really agree with it, so it's like hard to think the other side. But everything in like the Constitution is very broad, and the whole point, I think Sivan was getting at this before, that it's their job to kind of tweak it and make it more clear and more precise. And so so one could say that this whole clause ruling should have been much more precise because it's almost just as broad as Constitution was.
Can I ask you a question? I'm gonna jump in for one sec to ask you, actually everyone, but specifically Shana, a question. Are you getting at like, you're worried that this may just create a blank check, that Congress can do anything it wants and there are no clear lines and what is in and what is out? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it as much as like giving them the power to do anything. I was thinking of more as it's unclear to like the country pretty much, or for the following rulings. It's hard to use this as a precedent case if it's not
Right.
really saying exactly.
Although
what
we know it's
to
used as a
say.
precedent case because
We know it is, but I feel like it's.
I mean, lots and lots of courts later on say we're giving Congress the power to do this under the necessary and proper clause, and then in parentheses we'll say, see McCullough against Maryland.
Yeah.
Is that
Because it's so
broad? The ruling
yeah,
itself.
But I feel like it would be used in a better way if it was more precise.
So here's I want to take this one step further for the group. I want to tell you a story, and then see what you guys think of it. So you're getting at this question of where are the lines? Are there any lines? And Jacob, this gets at your really a great move that you made to ask for a vote, right? So I'm curious what you guys think about this story. So here's a story of Congress doing something, and then the Supreme Court stepping in. Wait, should I do this?
Is this the talking about the Commerce Clause one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
knew-
exactly what I
I
was
was
gonna say.
thinking about that also.
Yeah,
Actually, the Commerce
exactly.
Clause one.
Yeah. What? I'll do it. Quick. Okay.
Oh, he's
So
doing it.
here's the story. All right. So here's the story. Yeah, you know. So somebody knows. So in the late 1930s and early 1940s, there was a major wheat glut. There was way too much wheat that was being produced, and so Congress passed a law. In order to bring wheat prices. So the wheat glut, too much wheat on the market, made wheat prices go down. And so Congress passed a law to restrict the amount of wheat that could be sold. And so they passed a law that said this: you are allowed anybody, any farmer, to produce only X amount of wheat on your land, whatever number of acres. And so, hold the case up again. So a fellow named Roscoe Filburn was a farmer, I don't know where, but anyway, he was a chicken farmer. And he produced wheat, grain, whatever, for his chickens, only for his chickens. And he didn't sell his chickens, it was for himself, his own consumption. He never sold a drop of his grain, he didn't sell anything to anybody, period. He produced more wheat than he was allowed under the federal law. And the federal government found out, and they came onto his property, and they made him burn his crops. And he sued the federal government. He said, you had no right, you have no power under the Constitution to come onto my land and burn my crops. And the federal government said, yes, we do, it's under the Commerce Clause. I said, what are you talking about? I don't sell my stuff to anybody. I've never once sold one grain of my wheat to a single human being. All it says is Congress has the right to regulate commerce between the states. I never sold it to anybody across state lines. I never sold it to my neighbor. You have no right to do that. What you're telling me, Congress, is that you can come onto my property anytime you want, and under the Commerce Clause, you can destroy my property. How can that be? And the Supreme Court took up the case, and they agreed with the federal government. They said that the amount of wheat that any person produces for themselves will impact the amount of wheat that they then have to buy from other markets. And all those markets are interconnected. They go across state lines, all that kind of stuff. And so when you, Roscoe Filburn, produced all of that extra wheat for yourself, you were not buying wheat from the rest of the market, and that affected interstate commerce. Therefore, we have the right, Shane, am I getting at what you're getting at?
Yeah, I really like that one.
So that's what I want you guys, so if what we're trying to do is to figure out where are the boundaries, play with the boundaries a little bit. Like, and you, as you can well imagine, McCullough against Maryland was the centerpiece of that ruling for the Supreme Court. They quote it all the time. This is McCullough against Maryland is what gives us the right to do it. All right. Other questions? I just want clarification questions. I just want to throw that into the mix and let you guys talk. Yes.
Part of the land to a motel versus United States.
Right. So that comes in. That follows next. I don't want to. Right. So I don't want to start. I think I just wanted to. You can say whatever you want. I just wanted to give you guys an added little bonus story for you guys to talk about. Go for it, continue your conversation.
So the question is, how far can you stretch necessary and proper, or they can stretch necessary?
Yeah, or to follow up, almost like just slight rewording is it better to have a government where the necessary and proper clause is very strict and the government can't do anything, or where it is very loose and the government can do almost anything? Because I think we've talked about before that if necessary and proper is so strict that you can't buy tar to pave roads, you're in trouble. But if it's so loose that you can set market prices, like that could also be a problem. So I'm wondering if you think, like, how do you balance it, and what do you think is more problematic?
I think that there might be some merit to So I'm looking for a technical difference that explains why buying tar is okay, but banning producing crops is not. And I would say that maybe if you have an action that you want to show is necessary and proper for one of these powers, you would want to know how many steps does the action go through to benefit the power. So if you are buying tar for roads, that is immediately connected to establishing post roads. But if you are banning crops on a farm, then that is connected to a single individual buying wheat, which is connected to, and it's more indirect, or so it seems to me. It has it's more indirect from producing crops to interstate commerce. And that's far from testable because a step of relation isn't defined. But what do people think? Is that helpful? Should we pursue that?
I agree with you with that, but I'm gonna talk about like the stretching it, like buying tar is different than people bringing back to like this actual case, is different than a private company regulating money. Like that's so much more important, than just like the buying tar. It would be like, instead of saying buying tar, it should be like construction workers actually making roads.
Pause for 1 second. Actually, hold on 1 second. Who is in the seminar? Just raise your hand. I just want to make sure. So I would love to hear for a few minutes from voices of people. So this is great. People who have not talked a lot. I'm not measuring this, but just people who have not talked a lot. So you be your own judge of whether you talk a lot, and step out for a few minutes and let people who have not talked a lot to step in.
I'm going to make a claim about, I think that the loose interpretation is better. And my claim is that it's because if we look at like how states are affected when we have a loose compared to broad interpretation of what Congress can do with a necessary and proper clause, I think that it's better that it's loose because it will give Congress a little more push, a little more wiggle room for what they can do, and then states can then therefore push back on them. So it creates more of a, I feel like it creates more tension between states and federal government, which I think is healthy in the type of government that we have in this nation. And that's why I think that's why we have to lean towards having that loose interpretation.
So is that a political reason?
Yeah.
Do you think that, this kind of goes back to the question that was asked in the partial essays, like do you think that it's legally it should be strict, but politically it should be loose, and you think politically trumps legally, or you think it also legally should be loose?
I think they work together, and I think that in a time where there's legal ambiguity, you turn to political. I mean, like that's kind of what happened in Marshall v. Marbury v. Madison. And so like with this, like Maryland tried to tax the bank, but because the bank was run by federal government, they said you can't do that. And so like I feel like that's why I think Marshall had proper usage of this clause in this case, just because you're able to see that that give and pull, that push and shove between government and between federal government and state government.
Okay. I really like this example that I found, and it says, for example, let's say I write out a contract granting you the authority to run my grocery store. I don't need to specify that you have the power to pay a guy to clean the floors or hire a mechanic to fix a freezer when it goes down. Those powers are necessary and proper to running a grocery store. But necessary and proper powers don't give you the right to give away all of the food items in my store and turn it into a pornography shop. So that's the example they gave. So I think that's a really cool idea, because it's saying that necessary and proper doesn't mean anything you want or anything Congress wants, and it doesn't mean anything and everything. And there's this necessary and proper doesn't give them any more extra powers. They can't create new powers. but they can create stuff that needs to be created such that they can do the powers that they already have. And so I don't know if you call that a loose definition. You just like, I would call it a sort of just like a not pretending to be more than it actually is.
So do you disagree with that? Is Marshall's read on the blank check?
What exactly does the question mean by a blank check?
Like giving Congress any power they
Oh,
want?
yeah, so then yes, I do agree. I do disagree, I mean, yes.
I have a question. So if we were to if we're talking about implementing this, if we were as a Supreme Court, do you think that it should be, that the Congress, if it's brought up, the Congress has to prove that it is necessary, or that the prosecution has to prove that there is not necessary? It's it's an important distinction, because innocent until proven guilty, and then guilty until proven innocent. Are we gonna say, talking about necessary and proper, are we gonna give Congress the benefit of the doubt, or are we gonna force Congress to prove itself?
I really like that question, mostly because I think it supports my opinion. That's
how you should evaluate anything, really.
But in this country, you're right. We have this idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, and I think that's the way the Constitution has to be looked at, because that's the status quo in our country, and that's the way that we run our criminal system, and every that's just it's how we have to run our country. Just because it's too much in society already.
So I deeply disagree. I think.
All right, go.
No, I think when it's the government going to people, and people interacting with the government, people should be given the benefit of the doubt. I think when it's the government, we're talking about whether or not the government has the right or power. It's not. We don't have the government does not get a Bill of Rights. The whole point of the Constitution is to limit the government, and because the Section 8 is written positively, is saying basically Congress has these powers, and if you look at the 10th Amendment, only these powers. It makes it so Congress has to be, if someone sues and is able to show that there was some it's reasonable that probable whatever, Congress should have to be able to show the bond code of proof to show that what they're doing is reasonable, is necessary and proper, even if that has a broad definition.
Yeah, I agree. I think if 19 said they can make all laws except what's unnecessary and improper, then you would have to actually prove that what they did is unnecessary and improper. But since it says they can only do what is necessary and proper, they need to justify why what they're doing is necessary and proper.
But then it wouldn't match the rest of the writing style of the rest of the Constitution. I think it's written. The entire Constitution is written. Section 8 is entirely written in the positive. And I think it would just sound wrong if it was written in the negative. And I think for that reason, that's why you can. And because we have this understanding that you're innocent until proven guilty, that's why we have to go with that understanding. We have to go with that Congress is right until we can prove that they're wrong.
Okay, so I have then two things. So one, if how Marshall says, I forget one of the rulings where it says that you can't overturn something in the Constitution unless it's very clear that it's a violation. I forget which he says that in. So you're applying that same standard.
Yeah.
And also, but then, does that then make the McCullough versus Maryland wrong? Because he says we're not going to prosecute the Constitution on this at all. Because that's neither of the two options that are in that box. Because he's saying that, that we're not gonna challenge Congress at all. Because that's what the ruling is saying. But that's neither of those two. So then, do you disagree with the fact that Congress should be given free rein completely? There's no way to disprove it?
No, because there's definitely I feel that there is a way to disprove it, but I feel that if Congress if something passes, it has to be
Because you see what I'm getting.
Yeah, I see
right?
what you're getting at. I don't know.
I also want to answer Mr. Cadden's question that he wrote, but what if I can prove that this new pornography shop is what's in the best interest of running the grocery store? I think that's really.
I'm just gonna leave that up there on the board.
Yeah.
Like visitors to come in and totally take that out of context. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
It's
And now we have that on tape too. Yes. Go ahead. Yes.
The grocery store could, in theory, make the most money from that, but in doing that, it would no longer be a grocery store. And the important part is Congress has to do these things while still staying Congress. And I feel like a lot of what defines Congress is these powers that they have. And so it's like I was looking at the rest of this definition, and they define necessary as necessary to carry out the original purpose. And so the original purpose of a grocery store is selling groceries. And so that it could be in like the best interest financially, but it's not the original purpose. And so it's creating a power that's beyond what they originally had.
But this isn't changing.
So, but I think that
Is that Kobe? Do I have this right? I just want to make sure that you just added. Sorry, that I just wrote several. Like what we're trying to just figure out how to get at a definition of necessary and proper. I
Right.
think you just added a new one, which is by
Yeah.
understanding what Congress is supposed to be.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So do you think that that if Congress burned someone's crops that they were growing for their chickens, then it is no longer Congress?
No.
So then, in that case, by your definition, it is okay for Congress to burn someone's crops. So I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think that your definition allows Congress to do that.
I think he's saying, oh, sorry. Go.
Can I go meta on this whole
Yeah,
thing for
yeah.
a second? What is the whole point of the grocery? What is a person who's owning the grocery shop? What's their general goal?
To have a grocery shop.
Or is it to make money?
But you can't assume that.
But also,
You can't assume that it's a like why does anybody have like unless they have a particular passion towards grossing, which they might.
Now.
But I think in general, the way that I'm seeing it is the main goal is to make money, and if the best way to make money is that the pornography shops are going to sell a lot more, then I don't see why that is wrong. And so,
Is
let me finish my
Translate that to
point. Let me
Congress. What
finish
do you
my
think
point.
Congress's main point
And
is?
so that's my okay. I'm
Okay,
where it goes
sorry,
extra
you're getting
meta.
it. Okay.
The question then comes down to, first of all, what is the point of laws? Is the point of laws to protect you? Is the point of laws to protect the people living in the country, or is the point of laws to give them the best possible life, or is the point of laws you have to define what the point of laws are, and then you get to define what is Congress's actual job, and is Congress's actual job to make the country a better place, or is it the Congress's actual job to one step away from that, like. Yeah, I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
And then
that's
parallel
exactly
that to
what
the
you're trying to
grocery
say.
store.
Adding on to Sivan, I really agree with you.
Yeah.
That using this as like the example, like I also agree that it mostly the main purpose of that is to make money, and the whole purpose of Congress is to why do I keep saying Congress? Supreme Court is to follow laws. Follow laws and make sure laws are being followed. So that.
Well, I think no. The reason I lost is because I think in the analogy, Congress is actually the grocery store.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's,
No, in my analogy.
Yeah, I know.
No, I think the analogy America is the growth. Like.
Yeah.
No.
Wait, go on.
America.
Wait. Have I just tried
I think you're right.
this?
America is the grocery store. Congress is the temporary.
No,
is the
America
And
is the
then
person.
selling the
America is the
Congress
person. No, America is the person. America is the person.
Wait. Okay, stop. I'm just gonna referee for a second. I don't want to spend a great deal. If you can clearly state what the analogy is, great. Otherwise, let's not debate because then it turns into comic ridiculousness. Do you want to try it? You want to try it?
I
Go
want
ahead.
Sophie to do it.
I think America is the person, and the money is like what's best for the person, and the laws are like trying to figure out what's best for America.
Can I say where I
Oh,
was going
okay.
with it? Because I remembered.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, whatever it is like the point of the business is to make money. The point of Supreme Court is to make laws, and whatever way it gets you there, gets you there. So, selling pornography makes you money. Sell pornography, and whatever law it is to make, or whatever their ruling is to follow the laws.
So do you think they should use whatever means to get there, and that's
Yeah,
fine?
so I think
Okay.
this was an
Wow.
necessary.
I would never expect you to say that, sorry.
Yeah, I know, I wouldn't expect you to say that.
So you actually think that it is completely okay for what they did to burn that guy's crops?
I mean, and I originally, like, right as when I think of that, I think of the day of warrant and all that type of stuff.
Well, let's say they did.
Yeah, and that's what my first thought of it was, but I don't know, it's so stretched, that's like, this isn't that stretched because it's regulating money, and that's stretched by being like,
I don't
you're not
think it's-
buying, like, I think that's
So-
more stretched than it is, so.
But you said the point of Congress is to make laws. And
She said the point of the
The
Supreme Court
point
is
of
to
the
make
Supreme Court is to follow laws.
I don't think we have to go this meta. I don't
Well,
think.
why not?
I think can we drop the metaphor? I think metaphor more perfectly. I think the metaphor can be very, very simplistic, which is the original owner is the Constitution. There was a contract. I don't know. There was a contract again.
Why don't we just talk it as it is?
But I'm just saying. I don't know. I think it's very. I think it can.
Because I really like that.
Can I just try it? And we'll
I think it's
I'm
fake, honestly, I don't mean this in a rude way, I think it's wasting our time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
like,
think
I
so.
think that's the whole point of this entire discussion, no matter if it's Bill Byrne or if it's about this Maryland thing, anything we're talking about is how far can you stretch the Constitution to make it still sound.
Alright, so I'm gonna ask, just within the last few minutes, those of you who have last points to make them. I wanna hear from especially, so I know there were a few points over here in this general direction, 3 people. I'd love to hear from you guys, and then we're gonna wrap it up, so whoever wants. I think Jake, actually, I cut you off first.
No, it's okay. I'm
Sophie, eyes are on you, go for it.
I'm a little unclear on what question we've actually been trying to answer for the past couple of minutes.
Sorry, I think it's that one up there. How do you know when you've stretched too far? I think that's basically.
Okay.
I also want to kind of try and sum up like what Shayna and I are saying differently. I think I'm saying if it's legal, if it's written, like in the Constitution, you can find a way to do it. And Shayna's saying if you need to do it, you can write a law to do it. Is it that simple?
I mean, like, yes and no, because I don't think that you, like, there's certain boundaries that you can do, and my question is just, I don't know those boundaries, like, I guess essentially, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a little
So, yeah.
bit. Sorry, you can start.
So I think I want to go back for the closing thing, like to the thing where about the should Congress be given the benefit of the doubt. So I think that we agree that, or I think most of us agree that this ruling states that who are we to question what Congress does necessary and proper, that there is no case to be made against Congress for what is necessary and proper. Like, you can't prove. But do we think that that is the right, application? Like, do we think that that there's no case you could ever make against Congress? Like, do you think that if someone were to prove that there's another way of doing something, or like the whole necessary and proper, like, should Congress be given the benefit of the doubt? Should Congress never be questioned, or should Congress have to prove itself?
Sophie?
Are you trying to go back to what we were talking about before when we were asking whether Congress has to justify if a law is necessary and proper or whether,
Yes, exactly, yes.
I think Congress should have to justify whether something is necessary or proper, because I think Marshall kind of treats this ruling like Section 8 says that Congress can do anything that they feel is necessary and proper, but he kind of like takes the burden of deciding whether something's necessary and proper off his shoulders and puts it on Congress's shoulders, when I think it really belongs to the Supreme Court to interpret the words in the Constitution and decide whether something is necessary or proper.
I agree with you, but I also think to some, like, I agree with you that I'll just say what I think. That it's up to, I agree with you that it's up to the Supreme Court to decide whether it is necessary or proper. But what I disagree with you is that I don't think it's up to Congress to decide whether it is or not. Because what they're doing is they're writing the legislature, and it's up to the Supreme Court to make sure that legislature is in line with the Constitution.
All right.
So I